2, 1.
We'd like to welcome you to another edition of Grok Talk, brought to you by New Hampshire's leading conservative blog site, GraniteGrok.com. We are your feared extremist, right-wing, hard-charging, gun-toting, opinionated, outspoken, rabble-rousing, letter-writing, radio microphone stomping conservatives and rational libertarians. So get ready for more news and opinion you could only get from GraniteGrok.com.
Grok Talk.
Welcome back to Hour 2 of Grok Talk, brought to you by the Coalition of New Hampshire Taxpayers, who allow us to use this lovely place in Concord, New Hampshire, 8 North Main Street, upstairs past the Tattoo Parlor. We share space with a lot of great groups. New Hampshire Right to Life is right down the corner here. Ton of education groups, of course, taxpayer groups, all working out of the same office. Citizens for CVA.
Concerned
Veterans for America is behind us. So a lot of great work going on here.
And all of this, or nearly all of this, under the auspices of the Coalition for New Hampshire Taxpayers.
Which is necessary because we live in a world where cultural appropriation is bad, but gender appropriation is good, right? Remember that.
Yes.
No contradiction. That's okay.
Well, let us introduce our...
Well, first I have to do that. Don't forget to listen to us on Stitcher, Spreaker, TuneIn, iTunes, iHeartRadio, and, of course, at GraniteGrok.com. And now, our next guest served during the Reagan administration as Special Assistant to Attorney General Edwin Meese III, Special Assistant to President Reagan for Domestic Affairs, co-founder of the Federal Society for Law and Public Policy, and the current president of Club for Growth. Please, boy, I got the blah-blahs this morning. Please welcome to the program David McIntosh. Good morning.
Good morning. Good to be with you guys.
Good to have you on. So we haven't I don't think we've talked about the Ex-Im Bank since we had you on last time. And it's a good question because, there was a lot of push to Congress to do nothing. But where are we now with the Ex-Im Bank? And then we'll go from there.
Yeah, and we actually thought this one we could get them to go along with it because doing nothing seemed to be what they were good at. But no, they couldn't even manage that. And as you remember, the Ex-Im Bank is this taxpayer-subsidized entity that gives large corporations subsidies on their financing when they sell to foreign countries. And we said, you don't need that. The marketplace takes care of it. If anything, the taxpayers are subsidizing deals that shouldn't be done. And there's a lot of corruption, like the 31 different federal cases where people were paying bribes to get the Ex-Im financing. Right now, where it stands is Congress did reauthorize it as part of the highway bill earlier in the year, or late last year, actually. And then, but two things have happened. One, the Senate, and I'll give credit to Senator Shelby from Alabama for doing this, because he's the chairman of the banking committee that has to approve the nominations. And he said, no way, I'm not going to nominate the board members. And by law, if they don't have enough board members, they can't do any of these deals over a couple $1 million. So the two big players, GE and Boeing, that really spent several $1 million of lobbying to get Congress to do this, they're stuck. Their deals won't go through because they don't have enough board members. Now, of course, they're now lobbying to push and pressure Shelby to release a hold and let them go through. But he stood up to Mitch McConnell and the Democrats and said, no, I'm just not going to do this.
Mitch McConnell and the Democrats, as in he's their leader?
Yeah, no, exactly. He's definitely the leader on this one. He says he's against Ex-Im Bank, but then he pushes Shelby to go ahead and do the confirmation.
Exactly.
So there won't be any...
Which is why Ted Cruz accused him of lying.
Right. There won't be any taxpayer-backed loans so that Boeing can build jets for Iran?
That's the big issue, and the White House is now entering in the fray and pressuring really hard on it because they want to do deals with Iran to show that the deal the president cut helps Iran out. So it's going to become a big issue. We are also looking at one of the aspects of this, which is when they went ahead and reauthorized it, they voted down an amendment that said, okay, we'll reauthorize it, but you just can't do deals with governments that sponsor terrorism. So no state sponsors of terrorist groups can be eligible for the Ex-Im deal. Of course, the guys who wanted the Ex-Im just blindly voted that down. And there's going to be a couple of them that are going to have to listen to their voters this time, because the Club for Growth is going to start telling them this is the way your guy voted when he voted the wrong way on the XM Bank.
I was just going to ask you if you have that list.
We do.
Okay,
we
good.
posted it. They're almost all the Democrats. So, for example, in Florida, a guy named Chris Murphy, who's running for Senate, voted like the sheep along with everybody else on that one. But there are about 63 Republicans as well, and they're not going to be immune for us telling their voters how they voted.
What other corruption is there involved in this thing? Obviously, you mentioned GE and Boeing, but they can't be the only people who are taking advantage of this.
No, and there's hundreds of companies that are smaller than that take advantage of it. They typically the deal, the real corruption is where somebody will take a bribe or offer a bribe to get on the list and get approved for it. If you remember the guy, I think his name was Jefferson, that he was a Louisiana congressman.
Yeah, had a freezer full of cash, yep.
Yeah, that cash was part of an XM deal where somebody was bribing him to call up and tell the XM Bank that they should get the loan.
Nice.
It's an example of how corrupt this whole system is. But they also typically will do deals instead of doing deals with companies that are in like Europe or even Asia. A lot of them will be to the corrupt African countries where the marketplace says, "Hey, if you're going to do that deal, then you got to buy an extra letter of credit or something because we know they're not going to pay you back." The company says, "Hey, we can just do the XM financing, and the taxpayer will take the risk and the loss that these third world countries won't ever pay us back."
In other words, under any kind of prudent business management, you wouldn't do the deal.
Right, or you pay the extra financing cost and make your client pay for that.
Right. I mean, you say I mean, you say extra letter of credit, but basically what you're doing is you're purchasing insurance. Of course, in some cases you're just purchasing a bribe, but I think in this case it's like mortgage insurance or any other kind of overlay that says we're insuring against the risk that this is in fact a bad deal.
Yeah, yep, that happens often in these XM deals, where instead of making them do that, the government says, "Okay, we'll provide the financing." When it goes up bust, the taxpayer pays for it.
Yeah, and they claim that the bust rate is very low, but the point is that the government's taking the risk on our behalf without our say-so, and not the company that's making the deal.
And you've got a marketplace for this, and it'll price it for the right cost of the risk involved, and there's no need for the government to do this.
And what's the what's the insurance requirement on selling, say, 787s to Iran if they get used to drop nuclear bombs in America?
Right.
Or crash into buildings.
Can you insure against that, or does only the Exim Bank underwrite such things?
Yeah, I bet even Lloyd's wouldn't take that one on.
No kidding, huh? All right, so you've obviously a lot of people aren't thinking about this because it fell off the radar after they reauthorized it, except for people inside the sausage factory like us. The Senate's obviously the key to this, I think. How effective do you think we can be this year in trying to turn it around so that we have a Congress that will do something about this corruption?
So this year's so complicated with the Trump getting the nomination for the Republicans, and we're going to see it play out differently in each of these states. And honestly, the club was very involved in that, but we decided we're staying out of the presidential race. From our perspective, there's no good choice. But we are going to focus on the Senate and House races. And there, we're looking for champions, people who had 90% better on our rating when they were there, or knew, like in the open seat, we've got Dr. Fleming down in Louisiana. And what we're realizing is we're engaging in the campaigns. We come in as an independent expenditure, as a super PAC. We also, our members will bundle contributions to the good guys. We're realizing that it could turn out, it could turn out that Trump wins slightly, or it could turn out he loses really badly. If he loses really badly, it'll be hard for us to keep the good guys in the victory lane, just because of the turnout problem. if he loses badly, it's because certain segments of the Republican coalition just decide they're not going to vote. Now, we're also looking at, and I haven't figured out the right language yet, but essentially the message that says, if you don't like the presidential choice, you still got to vote for Congress or Senate, because it matters more than ever that we get strong champions for liberty who will stand up to Hillary and her socialist ideas and negotiate with Trump to keep him more conservative on his ideas.
Which is exactly why we're trying to replace one of our senators this time around, because we want somebody who's going to straighten up and vote right.
Max?
Now, in the past, Max Abramson, Republican state representative, I also happen to be the Libertarian candidate for governor this year. We have two former governors, Governor Johnson and Governor Weld, who are on the top of the ticket. And as I said at the Libertarian Convention, I said, I'm just looking at down ticket. This is where all the really important decisions are made that affect people in the state legislatures and in the down ticket races, executive council races, county commissioner races. And I don't think people realize the importance of some of those races and what's going on. We've done polling.
So it'd be great if the people who are just saying I can't vote for Trump, I usually vote Republican,
right,
come and vote Libertarian at the top, but then help us win the races down.
Well, there are two sides to that. Right now, in early polls, we're seeing that Johnson's pulling more votes from Hillary. However, in terms of turnout, typically Libertarian candidates, about half, 40 to 50% of the people who vote Libertarian said that they wouldn't have voted at all had there not been a Libertarian candidate somewhere in there. And I'm wondering if you're seeing the same thing, and do you think it's a benefit to have two former Republican governors as well covered as Governor Johnson and Governor Weld are right now, having that help boost voter turnout, maybe bring some people out who couldn't bring themselves to vote for Trump but certainly aren't going to vote for Hillary?
I think a key to that will be the debates. If they're high enough up in the polls, they can really insist on being part of the debates. Then it gives people that third option. What we're finding is, for example, a lot of people don't really know they can either skip the president or split tickets. And so they're thinking, gosh, if I'm not going to vote for president, I'm just not going to vote. But I think if they see there's another option on that, and the debate's going to be the time when the voters who don't really pay attention will get a glimpse of what's going on. So I'm hoping that will end up being the case.
You guys do a lot of Club for Growth. I know you were focused on the presidential primaries a lot when we had an opportunity to nominate somebody like, say, Ted Cruz. But now you're obviously focused on the Senate races. What else are you guys working on?
The House is key to us as well. And there, this cycle have started basically a new strategy for the way we approach the House races. We looked at and analyzed every single Republican in the conference and said, okay, how many of them are champions of liberty, either part of the Freedom Caucus or the Liberty Caucus, or what I call fellow travelers, people who may not join the caucus but will vote the right way most of the time. And we found out there were roughly 65 out of the 240. So we said, okay, let's develop a program. We can't get it all done this election, but over the next 2 or 3, we ought to be able to, where we add, 10, 15, 20 at each cycle to that number, so we get up to 120, so they can win the leadership races and shape the direction of the Republican majority. Because that came from my experience back in the 90s when I was elected along with Newt Gingrich. We had a strong conservative majority in the Republican conference. We had leadership that was like Dick Armey, that was willing to fight to keep the agenda going, and it made a huge difference. So whatever you think of Paul Ryan, if you're happy with his conservative principles because of entitlement reform, we'll elect leaders to back him up. If not, if you think we need even better leadership, we can have an opportunity to do that. But right now, and this came from my chairman, who's a wise businessman, he just said, David, you don't have a majority of the majority to get this done, so what are you going to do? And that challenged us to develop this long-term strategy. We call it Majority That Matters, and it's working. We've had some really good candidates come through, Jim Banks in Indiana, Warren Davidson in Ohio, a new guy, Ted Budd, in North Carolina, just won the primary. There's a guy coming up in Georgia in the runoff, Crane, who is like he's been voted the most conservative small government senator in the Georgia legislature. And so we're starting to identify and help these new members come through the system. Some of them will be there to get us the majority in the House. Some of them will be future Ted Cruz's and run for higher office.
That's a great strategy. Thank you, David. Well, we're going to have to watch that one carefully and encourage our listeners to chip in at clubforgrowth.org. And there's all sorts of stuff. There's the presidential white papers, there's the scorecards for the House and Senate, and much, much more, correct?
There is indeed. In fact, you can look up exactly how your member voted and where they stand on the economic freedom and pro-growth policies.
If you had to send a message to voters for November, because we're running down, we got about 3 minutes left, what would you say?
Number one is, and we call it Save the Nation, Save Our Congress. It's key that you vote and vote for a conservative, you call it conservative, rational libertarian, for the option who will stand up for those principles, even in the minority or wherever the chips fall in the presidential race. It's key that we vote. Tell your friends and neighbors, your family, whatever they think about the top of the ticket. It's so critical that we get a strong, freedom-loving members of Congress, and that's the way our system works. If you don't have a good president, you get Congress and the courts to keep us on track. And
okay, let's say Hillary wins, and we don't do as well in Congress as we'd like. What do you think our strategy is?
Yeah, and most likely outcome there is we still have a majority in Republicans in the House, and probably will lose the Senate majority, but they're not below 40, so they can filibuster and stop the worst. There we just got to, the true freedom-loving guys who have a spine have to go to their leadership and say, you just got to do it. You got to be in opposition. So, for example, we talked a little bit about the courts. They're doing the right thing to say we're not going to give Obama this late-term pick to switch the balance for a generation of the Supreme Court. Frankly, if it comes down to Hillary president, then I think we got to say we're going to hold out for 4 more years because so much is at stake. Right now, if you talk about that in Washington, they look at you with a blank stare, like, what planet did you come from? But we're going to have to develop strategies like that hold out for freedom as long as we can.
All right, sir. We have to go. Of course, clubforgrowth.com. Is that correct?
.org.
.org. You're .org.
.org. Thank you, guys. It's great to be with you.
All right. It's so good to have you on. We'll have to have you again.
Thank you for taking the time on a Saturday.
Take care.
Bye-bye. This is Grok Talk. We will be right back in just a couple minutes.
Warning, this is not a safe space. I repeat, this is not a safe space.
Grok Talk.